Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations, in which we explore a range of end-of-life topics with noted professionals in the field. This is presented by In Autumn's Cocoon. My name is Barbara Morningstar, and today's topic is exploring life, death, and millennials' curiosity and influence around this conversation. I am blessed to have Dr. Lauren Daly, and I want to give you a little bit of a background. We're both in the Vancouver, British Columbia area. Lauren is a palliative doctor, motherless daughter, longtime griever, and believer that having a healthy relationship with our mortality is the secret to living a better life. Her podcast, Talk Dying to Me, shares stories from the crossroads of life and death and all the messy bits in between. She hopes her work creates space for fellow mortals, as she says, to contemplate harder parts of being human and weigh in on life's greatest mystery. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so thrilled to have you on today. So I just want to preface the first question with a little reflection of something that happened in a workshop that I was doing once, a workshop series, when I was working for a hospice society. And I had a woman come up to me who had just immigrated from Africa to Canada. And we were in the middle of a workshop presentation on grief. And she came up to me and she said, "It's so interesting to me how in North America, everyone talks about the death of a child being the hardest death." And she said, "I come from Africa." And she said, "Children die all the time." And she said, even though it's heartbreaking and we feel for each death of the beauty of that child, she said, for us, when a mother dies, it is even more difficult because all these children become orphaned and we don't always have the capacity to support them in the life going forward because of the resources they had. So I'm bringing that up because I just want to, sometimes people compare losses, and David Kessler on his Facebook page recently talked about the danger of doing that because each loss to each person is deeply personal, woven in the heart, and felt profoundly. And so I'm quite moved we get to go into this conversation with you because it's rare that we get to hear the inner workings of a 6-year-old or the inner dialogue and experience of a 6-year-old. So for the viewers, your mother died in a car accident at age 6. So can you gently share with us or take us into that fateful day when you heard the news of your mother's death?
Yeah. So my sister and I she was 10, I was 6. And, it's so funny because when we experience, the most difficult day of our lives or the hardest day of our lives, the rest of your life kind of gets bookmarked by that event. And so I really do see it as like such a powerful, poignant piece of my life, even though it was, at this stage in my life, very, very early in the course of the rest of my time. But so it stands out very vividly. But essentially, I was 6, she was 10. I remember like the details of my school day that day. We got hermit crabs, and I was so excited to tell I loved animals, and I like desperately wanted a dog, but anything that I could sort of take care of was just fine by me. So the fact that we got hermit crabs in our school that day was like so exciting to me. It's like the most boring pet ever. But so I really so excited to come and tell her that. I remember my sister got a specific book set from our Scholastic book order. I remember what we had for dinner. I remember all of these details. And then it was like, and then there's that moment where it's like everything changes. So my grandfather came to the door and told my dad, like, there's been an accident, Charmaine's involved, you have to come quick. I remember that. I remember what he was wearing. I remember what the light looked like on him. And at this point, my sister and I had no idea what was, we thought accident meant maybe she would have to be in the hospital for a day. Maybe she broke her arm. maybe she'll have a cut on her face. Like all of these different ideas of what an accident means to a kid who has no concept that anyone or anything could die at this stage. And then neighbors started showing up. My close neighbor who really became we had a lot of people who became motherly figures in our lives after this happened, but she stands out as one for sure. She came, she finished our dinner. We were just waiting. We had no idea that anything terrible could be coming. And then my dad came home. And at this point, our house was filled with people just showing up, just waiting, right, for us to get the news. And then my dad came home and told us, and it's that moment in your life where even as a 6-year-old, you realize in that instant, things will never be the same. Mm-hmm. And this is a defining moment. And a lot of people not question me, but in, years later would say, well, you were only 6. Like, did you really understand? Did you really know what was going on? And I don't think we give kids enough credit, right? Mm-hmm. Like I knew that this was, I knew that this was permanent. I knew that things would never be the same, that my family was fundamentally changed. And I was fundamentally changed from this experience quite intimately. And on a cellular level, I kind of knew that to be true. And then of course you grow through your grief for me, it's the next, 25 years, 26 years. And that changes and you grow into it more, and you have moments of denial and moments of all of these other things that come forward in the aftermath. But in that moment, I knew, I think, more than what most of the adults in my life gave me credit for.
And that's the reason why I wanted to highlight this, because that is a myth that children are not feeling this to the depth. I mean, there's a beautiful story in one of Rachel Nairomi Remen's books where she's 3, I think she was 3, in front of her grandfather dying, in a profound moment of being seen. Dr. Alan Wolfelt, often gets interviewed. He's a noted bereavement counselor and educator. He said, when is a child old enough to grieve? And he says, when they're old enough to love, they're old enough to grieve.
Absolutely.
So we think because you're little, in fact, at that age, often the intuitive elements are on high alert, feeling everything to a depth that we don't always, as you say, acknowledge. So let me just even take you, your sister on your first podcast, go to the beginning of this, and then you talk about, I think this part's really interesting too, when your dad actually told you the news and what she mm-hmm. heard and what you heard, and just sort of, can you share that? Just the different perspectives and the ages and the different impact on that conversation.
Absolutely. Like he used the same words, obviously. We were sitting right next to each other, but you're right. We heard it very differently. And my sister heard it as this and my dad is a very loving person. Like he is a loving man who's done an amazing job raising us, on his own. And I say on his own. And what I mean by that is, we had tons of support, but as a single parent for a period of time. And my sister heard his saying, your mom is gone. She's dead. She's in heaven. She's not coming back. And I heard she's dead. She's gone. Like I heard very definitive terms. And my sister heard more of like this, mommy's gone. She was in a bad accident. She's in heaven. And heard it in a little bit of a gentler way. But it's interesting because now the more I learn about kids and grief, being concrete is really important. So in a way, I'm like very glad that I heard him say dead, dead, gone, not coming back, because I needed as a 6-year-old to hear things in a very concrete way, so as not to confuse that message at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually remember being in a situation once where there were 3 young children and the mother was in her early 30s dying. And I told the dad to use concrete words before they went into the room. And he kept saying that she's going to heaven or something. And I was sitting there trying to, I thought we talked about, and the 3 kids, we brought them in. It was guttural in their grief. The 6-year-old stayed a bit and went outside, and the social worker followed, and she was pissed. She said, Dad said she was going to heaven, but he didn't tell me she was dead or
Right.
dying. And
The daughter
so,
was said that, yeah.
the 6-year-old. And so it was a lesson for everyone
Yeah.
about the word. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to be so determined to have those words as direct so the children could understand it in a different way. So you're a testament to that. It's interesting.
Totally. Yeah. And I actually, for the last podcast episode that's coming out next week, I interviewed Andrea Warnick, who's a childhood grief specialist. She's very amazing, but she says exactly that, you know, like use concrete terms and be very concrete. But interestingly, if we're too concrete about things like heaven or the afterlife or these things that are unanswerable, then kids get very confused, right? They feel like, she says in her words, they feel like heaven is a shopping mall around the corner, right? So it's very, very interesting to say, you know, when you're talking about the death being concrete, but when you're talking about the things that are more unknowable, don't be too concrete. And I think that's a really interesting distinction.
Well, even the classic of, oh, she's just gone to sleep, and then the kids are afraid to go to sleep.
Totally. Yeah. The
So
things we say, right? Because the things we say as adults, because we're afraid, that actually can instill more fear in our kids. Because as kids, naturally, children are typically not as afraid of death or dying as the adults in their lives. That's an inherited way of being, I think, or a learned way of being.
So let's come back into the view of this 6-year-old and your beautiful dad. Oh, you know, like I'm like 30 years older. I'm closer to your mom's age. And when I heard this, my motherly instinct came up to want to just look after you, just feeling this little beautiful sweetheart. But your dad, you know, watching his grief and hearing him be sick, like tell us about what that was like as a 6-year-old, just observing the reaction of your other pillar.
Totally. You know, what's really interesting is, and I think as 6-year-olds and young children, in the early days of grief and loss, we're still 6-year-olds, right? Like we're still kids. We're very focused on the self. So looking outside of me and my needs and my kind of how am I going to survive this was very difficult. Like I actually don't have a strong memory. It was interesting talking to my sister because as a 10-year-old, she had much more of an awareness of the people around her, whereas my focus was very internal. And so I don't actually have a lot of memories of my dad or like the other really key people in my life. I can remember key moments of people connecting with me. But I don't remember a lot of my dad. My sister remembers seeing him look as you would expect a young man to look after losing, you know, his wife and the mother of his children, and being like physically ill the night that we learned that she died. But I don't actually have a lot of memories of that. What has happened since then and in the years that have come is my grief has, and I always say that grief is layered, right? It's never just one moment or one thing. It shape shifts over time as you grow and as your perspective broadens. And now as somebody who is in love and is thinking of having a family of my own and who has these beautiful nephews and sees my sister as a mother, I grieve for the other people in my life at that time. And I feel my father's pain, or what I imagine his pain to have been like, more intimately than I did as a 6-year-old.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Just based on the development and life experience, right?
Totally, yeah.
So let's go to, because kids are so into the senses of life, right? And just you beautifully share the memory of your mother, even through the scent of and sleep. And so can you tell us your impression of your mother's love and her presence through your senses?
Yeah, because I love that you put it that way, this idea of the senses, because another thing people often say to me, which used to piss me off so much, and it still does, people would say like, well, almost dismissing my grief by saying, well, you don't really remember her, do you? Like, how much can you remember as a 6-year-old? And in those moments, I'm like, you remember everything. And even if I can't remember specific moments or specific details, the way that we see memory as, like, to me, it's the feelings that mean the most. And so I remember how my mom made me feel. And I remember all of the tactile parts of being her daughter, right? Being rocked to sleep by her, just that sense of calming presence that often, if you're lucky, you only experience with a relationship like mother and daughter or mother and child. So so I remember that. I remember like her smell.
Vaseline intensive care.
Exactly. And like I say in those podcasts too, they don't make it anymore. Like you can't really get, I have tried every single one of Vaseline's current intensive care lotions and they do not smell the same. But that being said, every now and then I just get this waft of it, right? In the most unexpected place, and just be like, oh yeah, like right back there to being, a kid after my mom, gave us a bath and was rocking us on the chair. So I remember all of that. I remember the way her face smelled. And I have these, distinct moments of memory that really stand out, that are, you always worry that you're going to lose it, or you worry that you're going to forget important parts. Like the scariest thing for someone who's grieving, or someone who's experiencing loss, is that your person will be forgotten. And there's this beautiful quote, and I forget who it's by, but it says that remembering you is like carrying water in my hands a long distance. And it can feel that way sometimes, but then you get back to these moments of intimate connection that are less moments in time and more feeling. And you realize like that's not something that can ever be forgotten.
Well, and that's why I love Alan Wolfelt's reflections about it. There's more about integrating a loss, not about closure, but integrating a loss, because you'll never forget your mother.
Yeah.
Or someone you love. They're part of the tapestry and weave of who you are, right? So
Absolutely.
How do you continue to celebrate those beautiful threads of your being that have been given as a gift, right? So your mom, what's your mom's name?
Charmaine.
Charmaine. So we're going to talk about Charmaine now, because names are so important. We forget to say the name of someone. So podcast 2 is really quite profound as well, because we used to have babies at home and people died at home and kids were in and out of rooms seeing illness and dead bodies. And so you and your sister take us to the moment where you go to a viewing. I don't know if the viewing was part of the service or the funeral, but you actually go up to the coffin and see Mom in the coffin. Can you bring us to that moment too? Again, we're going to hear it from the being and senses and eyes of a 6-year-old, which is quite rich.
Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
Sure. I remember waiting so at the funeral home where I'm from, and it was a wake initially, and it was the one that we were present at as kids was smaller. It wasn't like the public wake where many, many, many people would have came, but it was a smaller kind of immediate family and friends. And I remember waiting in line to go in before they opened the doors, and just being a 6-year-old, like running, running up and down. I remember running like laps around all of these people who were somberly standing against the wall. And I think that's the thing too, is like children grieve. We all grieve in bursts, but especially in like that early kind of aftermath of loss, like, you will be intensely grieving. And then you're like, I need to go play with my dolls.
Right.
And adults will be like, are they okay? And it's like, yeah, just because we're playing with our dolls doesn't mean we're not grieving or we don't feel sad, right? Like, so I think that's an important misconception too, is like, Andrea Warnick says it's like puddle jumping, right? So you're in it and then you're out of it doing something else and then you're right back in it again. So I remember just running and like laughing and just being a 6-year-old. And I remember hugging my grandmother's legs, my mom's mom. And I remember her saying to me, "Oh, Lauren, I wish we could all just," she said something along the lines of like, "I wish we could all be feeling the way you're feeling now, or not feeling the way you're feeling, but more around like, if only we could all experience life as a 6-year-old kind of thing," was her sentiment. And keeping in mind that her daughter was, lying in a casket in the next room. So, and then I remember walking in and it was just like, as soon as you walk up, I don't really remember any specifics other than just feeling this overwhelming flood of emotion that really knocked me off off my feet. It was like the most intense feeling, and it even brings up emotion now talking about it. Yeah. So it's just this overwhelming intensity of emotion, and then feeling the support of people too. But sorry,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying my sister had more of a moment that I had no idea about until we talked about it, as adults. And actually in the first 2 episodes of the podcast, where she just remembers feeling all of those things, but then also this moment of like stillness and calm and peace. And I thought, and I had a moment like that, not at the funeral, but driving to the funeral home as well, just feeling and hoping that she was wherever she is, or wherever her spirit is, or whatever all of this means, hoping that and knowing in a way that she was okay and that we were okay. And so that part I can't really explain, like, as an adult who understands childhood development and all of this stuff, like for a kid to rationalize those things or to come to that awareness, I don't think is necessarily something that we know to be true academically, but in my experience, it was very real. And my sister had a very similar moment as well of just peace and calm and feeling like it's going to be okay.
Like an intuitive knowing it away from the intellect in a different way.
Yeah, like a presence.
And you could feel her presence, or it was just sort of a sense of her, what?
At the time I wouldn't have called, like, I don't think I had the awareness or language to be like, this is her presence.
Yeah.
But thinking back on the experience of the stillness that we felt, and it could be just the way that I cope or the way that I am interpreting this, but in hindsight, I would call it that. Yeah.
So let's just come to you actually seeing, this is profound too, when, you both talked about your mom looking like Snow White in the coffin, which is, and I think she had, well, you can tell us what she was dressed in, but
yeah.
But you looking at the body and the impression of her, I don't want to define it for her, I want you to share what that was like. Like, here's this body. Is it mom? Is it not mom? Like, tell us about that.
Well, she looked really good. Like, my mom was like a beautiful woman, right? And I think that's the other thing that's striking is, and for us, this was our first experience seeing we've never seen a dead body. Like, we had never seen anything like this before, right? So the intensity of that first experience being your closest relationship is, thinking about it now is just like unbelievable in a way. And yeah, so looking at her, like, I had no concept of what that would be like, but she didn't look scary. Like, she looked beautiful. And she died she wasn't sick before she died, right? Like, she died suddenly. So she looked as I remembered her looking. And it didn't, like, she didn't look dead necessarily. Like, she looked good. She looked beautiful. And I didn't look at her for a very long time. but in the moment that I did, it was a recognition that she was gone. Like, this is her body.
A knowing then in the feeling of that?
Yeah.
Like, again,
So
from a 6-year-old.
Totally. Like, even though when I say that she didn't look dead, it wasn't like I felt like she was just gonna animate suddenly. Like, I knew she was gone. And I think it really made for me this, it really helped me conceptualize death. In that, you know, there's something so visceral and real in seeing a body of somebody you love after they die that makes it permanent, right? Like, it's the closure around it. It's this clear understanding that this is her body, this is a vessel, and that there was so much more that made her her that's not there anymore. And for a kid, I think it's, you know, based on my experience, I think it's so important that adults and children and everyone have the opportunity to see their dead, like see the body of the person you love who's died, and be there with it and hold some presence with it, because it's a profound turning point in terms of recognizing what's happened, especially when what you've experienced was so sudden.
And did they prep you? Do you remember them prepping you before you went up to the casket at all? Or is that memory?
No, I totally remember. And I remember, like, we even were involved. I remember sitting on, you know, my mom and dad's bed, going through her closet, picking out what she would wear. And having a say, like having a bit of a say, like, do you think this would look nice? And that sort of thing. And I remember my aunt doing a lot of prep with my aunt Lois. She's like the go-getter in the family. Like, she's the person who reins us all in, keeps us all on track, which is hard for my family because there's a few of us that are kind of, you know, we push the edges. And but she does a good job, that's for sure. And so she was paramount in guiding us through this, because so many people in our, like, she was the one who had the capacity and capability of, you know, grieving intensely, but then also holding space for us.
That's beautiful.
And yeah, and for making sure that we were not just supported, but like aware of what to expect and what the next steps would be, and asking permission and looking to us for consent about different aspects of this, right? Not just assuming that we would or wouldn't want to do whatever part of the ritual was next, which was really important. But I remember her saying to us, you know, like, so she'll be there, your mom will be there, and her body will be there. You can touch her. She might feel cold. You can talk to her. She won't be able to hear you, but you can talk to her. She won't be able to talk back. Like, just very basics around making it clear to us that this was her body, right? She's not there, but her body is there. And that was really essential too.
Well, and I'm grateful for you to share this, because in our death-defying and fearful society now, often families want to protect kids from actually having that experience, and you're highlighting how important that is. Just bridging to a beautiful moment. My sister, I have 3 sisters. One of my sisters married into a French-Canadian family back east. And they still do a lot of viewings. And her 2 kids, when they were little, were going to funerals all the time and seeing dead bodies.
Yeah.
And there was a poignant moment. So I chose not to have children, but we had 2 dogs. My husband died in 2008, and one dog died first. Then my husband got sick and died. And then the beautiful German Shepherd, Angel, who was sick while he was sick, had heart stuff, died a year later. And I was on the island after my husband died, and this dog was just like my anchor. And she'd had heart surgery, and her lungs filled up, and then she had to take her to the vet when I was on the island, and she had to be put down, weeping. Came back to the mainland, and sister flew in with her kids to visit a few weeks later, and they picked up the ashes because I wanted the ashes, so brought them back. So I'm leading to this moment. So here's this little 4-year-old niece and 7-year-old nephew, and they're used to being at funerals because their family of origin involves them, and they're used to seeing dead bodies. And they knew I loved my dogs, especially this one, and I was sad. So they said to my sister, can we bring her the ashes? Because we know she's sad and we want to give them to her. So I had a moment where there was this 4-year-old and this 7-year-old who come right up in my face with this little urn of my dog Angel's ashes. And they with total love and innocence go, we knew that you were sad, so we wanted to give you this because we knew you loved her. And I'm like just about losing it. And then after they give it to me, they go, so what is that? So now I'm with an urn and ashes, and they want to, and I'm able to, because they know about a dead body, I'm able to move into what cremation is, and it doesn't hurt. And then they say, can we see what's inside? Now, most people will go, no, but we open it. And I say, do you want to touch it? And they put their fingers in it and they pull it out and they feel it. And we talk about why the bones are in little chips. And they're so curious and they're so wise in their innocence. And it was beautiful. It was healing for me and loving. And so I just really appreciate you sharing the depth of the inner dialogue and how the adults held that, because many people have removed or want to remove children from the truth of that. And it actually teaches them more deeply about love and life and loss, right? So,
yeah. Yeah. And I
profound.
think that instinct, although it is that instinct to shield our children or protect them from the harder things in life, it comes from a place of love. But it's ironic that in this specific circumstance, and I would say most circumstances, that our attempt to protect our kids actually can harm them, right? Like it can create anxiety and fear. You mentioned, children are perceptive, right? Like kids really can sense when something's off in their family or when something is amiss. And by not being honest and telling the truth, it just fuels more fear of what that thing is. And by naming it and being open and using direct language and all of this stuff, it just helps to show children that it's okay to go there. Like it's okay to talk about the harder parts of life and that you can survive these conversations, right? Like you can talk about it and go there and you can feel deep sadness and intense grief and you can survive it. And the way that my aunt did and my dad and all of these other people in our lives, the way that they held space for us to do that allowed us to grow the capacity to feel difficult emotions and gave us confidence to feel, the sadness that we would go on to feel forever. So.
Well, so then let's now leap forward. You're a palliative doctor.
I am.
I don't know if you want to share your age, but
I'm 32. I just
Right.
turned 32. I was going to say I feel like I turned 30 and then it was like just the time everything would stop and I'd be 30 forever. So it's funny because I was going to tell you I'm 30, but actually I'm 32.
Right. So, and medicine. So you're unfolding into your own life journey. When did you decide to go into medicine and what called you? Well, obviously life had an impression on this, but what called you specifically to palliative care? I don't think we've ever talked about the turning point towards that discipline.
Yeah.
So can you share that?
Yeah. So, medicine it's one of those things that I think a lot of people people create a story about what drives them to become a doctor that fits a nice narrative. And I did that for a long time too. But if I'm being truly honest, I was a driven kid. I was, I did well academically. I had a lot of support. I had a lot of people being like, you can do anything. Society told me that medicine was a really good job and a really good field. And if you can do anything and you can do that, then you've done really well. And so there's, you know, I think ultimately it was just, I was academically inclined, I was driven, and I just had it in my mind that I was going to be a doctor and I wanted to be a doctor. And I just did what I needed to do to kind of get to that point. And, you know, I think that's a very honest route to getting to medicine. It's probably true for a lot of people. But then I got into medicine with all of these like naive ideas about what it would be like, and you know, that it was going to be this, that it's this calling, and that you are with people at these really intimate moments, and you are going to connect with people on deep levels. And that's really what I was interested in, I think, growing up, was narrative and storytelling, and leaning into sharing vulnerability, I think, was one of the big things. And it really spoke to the experiences I had losing my mom as a kid, and feeling really comfortable in my own vulnerability because I spent so much time in that place. So I had this like very naive idea about what medicine would be like. And then I, you know, remember my first rotation being like, what the hell is this? Just being like totally shocked at the culture, some, you know, and you know, doctors are really great and many of them are wonderful, but you know how it is. Like, you've worked with a lot of healthcare providers, and it's a really challenging environment to exist in, and it breaks you down. And over time, people become hardened. They lose sight of really what they lose sight of a lot of the reasons that they went into it in the first place. And as a med student, suddenly bearing witness to what the reality of medical practice looked like, I was like, this is not what I expected at all. And I remember one distinct moment where I was like, what the heck? It was one of the early days of med school, one of my first patient encounters, this woman who had lymphoma, and we were learning how to do a lymph node exam. So there were about 6 medical students who went into her room, and we were looking at the chart ahead of time. And I remember reading in the chart that she didn't want to talk about her illness. She didn't want her family to know about her illness. She was, you know, it was the early days of her diagnosis. And she was processing and grieving and all of these things. And there was just one little note that said, like, she doesn't want to call attention to this, essentially. And then 6 of us walk in to practice a lymph node exam on her. So one after the other, we feel the thing she doesn't want to call attention to, and bring it forward 6 times, probably before she's ready to go there. And I just remember thinking, like, this doesn't feel right. I don't know if I want to do this. And then I found palliative care. I was like, oh, this is exactly what I thought medicine would be like, right? Because it's so much more it strives to be more person-centered, I think, and really focused on the humanity of medical practice.
So, yeah, and it's interesting because I have, you know, interviewed a number of individuals who are palliative doctors, and there's always that turning point, like their hearts just were guiding them to go to a deeper experience. And we're highlighting hospice and palliative care as an invitation to that, which we all hope ripples out into other elements of medicine, but beautiful. So here you are, 32, around death every day. I mean, I remember starting in my early 30s and being around death every day. Do you feel out of sync with other people in your age group because of that? Or how is that for you? I mean, you're a young one in the midst of all of these narratives and stories and life reviews, and how do you relate to the people that are your age, and can you?
That's a good question. You know, I think also, like, when it comes to friendship and forming connection with people, like, it's a bit of a self-selecting process. So So the people who I'm closest to know that when we have dinner, the topic of death is probably going to come up, and they can go there with me. And so I think that, I don't necessarily feel, now you have me thinking, Barbara, can I relate to other people in my social life? I think I can. I think my friends would tell you that we do okay, for the most part. And I think the other thing too is like, and also the older you get, right? Like it's, you get into your late 20s and 30s and shit starts happening to people. People start losing their parents, and people start losing children and spouses. And we're getting to this point in life where, and that's the thing about this work, right? Is like, we're all going to go through these losses. This is not an isolated event. And yeah, mine happened earlier than most. Probably was harder for me to relate to people when I was younger than it is now. Because now with time, other people are having experiences of death and profound loss and grief that I think I'm able to relate to better than I did when I was like a kid or going through, high school, for example.
As a palliative physician, you started this whole podcast called Talk Dying to Me. And before I do that, I mean, I think the myth too is a lot of people always think of hospice and palliative care. Well, palliative care is the pain management and control, but hospice is, end of life. They're kind of woven. They think it's for older people. It's a huge myth. And I know I started, probably close to 30 years ago now. And in the time that I've been doing it, the number of people now dying in their 30s and 40s of cancer is on the rise, and even 20s. So can you speak to, I mean, I've seen so many people die. I'm in my early 60s now, but even in my 50s, I was seeing so many people die younger than me. Can you speak to the truth of that? And then we'll get into Talk Dying to Me for the very reason the conversation's important, but about seeing younger people, it's a myth. It's not the truth.
Totally. I mean, young people get sick and die all the time, right? It's, and you're right. It's totally a myth. I think that, our work in palliative care is broad in scope and broad in terms of the demographic reach. And the other thing too is, even though the person even though maybe the bulk of our patients fall within the age of like 40 to 70 or what have you, we care for families, right? We don't just care for the individual. And so even if it's an 80-year-old or 90-year-old, we're caring for the grandkids and the kids and everyone else involved. We stand up for all of them. And so, what I'm always struck now, like it seems like my list that I print off every day of the patients that I'm going to round on, you kind of look at the ages, like there's a lot of people who are my parents' age, right? And who are, struggling with cancers and other things. And so I'm helping their children who are my age kind of walk through the experience of grieving their parent. And so even if, you're right, this experience of serious illness happens to a lot of young people, but even on the other spectrum of that, we're still caring for a broad range of ages, even if that person is not the person who's experiencing the illness.
Well, I remember years ago doing a video to bring awareness to hospice palliative care for British Columbia, and I was a part of the filming, and there was one clinical nurse specialist, and they were trying to show the team that comes around, but she was brilliant because she said, don't ever forget that the number one team is the patient and the caregiver in the center, or the family, and you're coming around that. And it's a privilege to do that, right? So children, grandchildren, you're nurturing all of them. Okay, so because of that, this conversation is really important. And you are so, I
Yeah.
just love your energy. I was hosting this informal group with palliative docs for seasoned and young ones, and you were in the mix before COVID. It was beautiful to watch when we all came together, and
Yeah.
some seasoned nurses too, sort of the seasoned and the new energy and the weave of the wisdom and the creativity, and you
Mhm.
all, there was magical moments, and we're going to do it again when we can,
Yes. Yeah.
but you bring beautiful creativity, curiosity, dynamic. I've looked at your Instagram. It's fun. It's just got beautiful words and quotes and inspiration. So talk dying to me. And I asked you, where did talk dying to me
Yeah.
come from? And I was kind of surprised. But so talk dying to me. How,
Yeah.
where did
So
that come from?
So Talk Dying to Me is the name of my podcast and the name of my, well, like the things related to my podcast and my Instagram handle and my Facebook handle, and my blog. And essentially, so the idea of the podcast just came to me one day where I was like, you know, we need to have more conversations about this. And what I realized too is I would go to, again, before COVID, like dinner parties or social events, and it would come up that I do what I do, and people were interested. They were curious. They wanted to talk about it, and so it really became clear to me that this um, fear or anxiety or shyness we have around talking about death and dying is really a social construct, and we're all just existing within this construct. Most people who have the opportunity, who want to share will want to share their story about even the most difficult parts of their lives. And it's just creating space for that opportunity. And that's really kind of the gap as I see it. And so I thought, okay, how can we kind of wedge that gap a little bit? And that's really where the inspiration of Talk Dying to Me came. And secondary to that is this realization and true understanding that a healthy relationship with mortality and an ability to openly discuss death and dying and grief and loss and the harder parts of being human really enhances your life and allows you to delight in simple pleasures, to love, I think, more deeply and intimately, to feel more connected in relationship to others, and to not take for granted, the things that are so easy to take for granted. The ability to enjoy a warm cup of coffee or a really nice meal, right? And to just delight in the everyday. So I was like, more people need to know what I know from doing this work. And that's why I wanted to create this podcast, to kind of share that more broadly. In terms of the name, which I think is maybe more what you're getting at. So it was, so there's this idea of like death positive or death positivity, which Caitlin Doty, who's she is a mortician out of LA, who's really created this amazing, organization called the Order of the Good Death, and really created this following of people who are really interested in talking about death, sweeping it, out of institutions and driving it into the mainstream where we can be open about our mortality and death and dying. And she coined the term as a play on sex positivity, which, is other generations have been responsible for being more open about their sexuality and kind of speaking more freely around sexual liberty. And her thought was, okay, now it's death's time. So let's sweep death out from the corners and from institutions and talk about it in a way that is without guilt and without shame. So Talk Dying to Me is more of a play on like Talk Dirty to Me,
right?
Which kind of came from that whole line of thought or line of reasoning. And I thought it had a nice ring to it. So,
but even Esther Perel with recently, forbidden conversations on sex and death and money, and trying to open the conversation in a different way, right? So, so let's go into that too, because I was blessed to be able to do, when COVID happened, Let's Reimagine realigned and did a virtual platform, and a friend and I did a presentation on the Let's Reimagine platform. And these are a lot of millennial younger people wanting to be creative with the conversation, life, love, and loss. And you could see them bringing the arts and music, and I met some of the creators and had a chance to interact, and they're adorable, just like you and your creativity. So how do you see this wave of within the millennials? At first we talked about we're going to have you talk and represent millennials, and thought that's too much of a weight on your shoulder, especially because your life experience is a bit different. But what do you see happening in the dynamic of those conversations opening up more? Can you just kind of have a reflection of, along with the woman you just talked about, ways people are trying to be creative to invite this to be more part of the mainstream again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think it's part of it is just natural, right? Like the difference is the willingness to have the conversation. Mm-hmm. What's the same is the way that we as humans express our passion for something, or our acknowledgement that something's important, right? So I think we could have had this conversation however many years ago about sex positive movement, and we'd be having the same conversation around creativity. And we use the tools we've always had to celebrate something that we see as valuable. Mm-hmm. So I think that millennials are just doing the things that humans have always done, just with a different piece of subject matter, which, you know, there is a core group of millennials in North America who really value this conversation about death and dying and think it's important. And I would say that most of those people have had experiences, right? Like, just because people are young doesn't mean they haven't had tremendous life experience that has taught them. And my experience is no different than a lot of kids' experiences, right? Of death and dying, or losing mm-hmm. someone who's essential to you. That is a thing that happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And now that we are entering, you know, our late 20s and 30s, like I said, we have children who are dying. We have spouses who are dying. We have parents who are dying, right? And we're recognizing even more the importance of having safe spaces to grieve and to feel the impact of tremendous loss, and then to support others who are going through it as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know for me, I haven't told you this, 2 events in my at 15, I was diagnosed with a health challenge, and I was too sensitive to the medication. So my mortality was being challenged. Mm-hmm. And then I lost a friend who completed suicide with fire mm-hmm. at 18. So mortality was in my face in a way that I was trying to figure out, which obviously those life experiences guided my life journey into a place of wanting to be understanding my own mortality and life and the mystery of life more deeply, right? Mm-hmm. So your own death, I'm going to get back to the millennials a bit, but after being around this, are you afraid of death? How do you think you would face your own death?
I think of this all the time, right? Like, I literally think about how I'll go see a patient and take a moment to just think, okay, what would I be doing in this situation? And it's part of the difficulty. Like, I think asking the question is really healthy and important. And the difficulty is, like, I actually don't know. I have an idea of how I might greet this greatest of challenges. But I don't know with certainty how I'll show up in those moments when my mortality is directly in front of me, if I have an awareness of it. Mm-hmm. I hope that it would be with grace and compassion and presence. But I don't know. Like, there are, and in terms of, you know, the fear of death, I'm not afraid to die. Like, I've never really carried the fear of death. And I think it is deeply rooted in losing my mom at such a young age, and being raised with the idea that your spirit goes somewhere after you die, and you can continue to connect with that spirit. And as a kid, I thought, oh, so when I die, I get to, like, be reconnected with my mom. That's not so bad. And it's not that I wanted to die, but it was more that holding on to that belief. I never feared death. It felt like there is an opportunity there at some point. So now, though, interestingly, that I am creating a life that I love, and I'm, you know, with a person who I love, and I have I'm, you know, thinking of having a family and all of this stuff, it feels like there's so much more to lose.
Mm.
And so it's not about the fear of death, it's the fear of missing opportunity and the fear of being disconnected physically from the people and things that I love so much. And so it's like a full circle. I don't know if I'm clearly articulating myself, but it's this full circle of like when I was little, it was like the most important thing to me had died. And so the idea of death was in a way less scary than it is now, because I've reconnected to all of these amazing relationships that are so meaningful, that the fear is losing that. But it's not a fear of death, it's a fear of relationship loss, right? And that's, I think, when you ask most people, are you afraid to die? It's not that they're afraid of the dying part, they're afraid of the missing part.
Well, we touched on, you know, through Esther Perel's work, what she had Jordana Jacobs on, and she did a presentation on Tomorrow's Promise to No One. And then she showed this wave of people, you know, death, love driving death. So people feeling their mortality, wanting to have passion and romantic liaisons and doing kind of crazy things, which is enlivening and amazing, as we all know, but sometimes short-lived, right? And then she turns it to have death to defend against love. And I know when my husband was dying, you know, the sexuality shifts and changes, and you work with it as the body is changing. But then as that sort of shifts out, the depth of intimacy and connection and love becomes so profound. It's hard to even describe it. And after they leave, you feel them and it lingers. And so can you speak, as we're coming to an end here, can you speak to the second part of what she was highlighting, how death defends love, moving into a deeper awareness of presence each moment, authenticity, something more lasting? I mean, I found at the bedside when people are dying, it is so authentic, and it was the same with him. And so can you speak to that experience and how that has impacted your heart, the privilege of that?
Yeah, that's a lot. I think that I like what you said around intimacy, right? And I think that these essential moments of our lives, so if we really were to narrow, I mean, there are many, but let's just say birth and death, strips us from all of the material things or the things we are taught to believe to be true. Like there's no there's no pretending, there's no vanity. Like it really strips it down to the core of what it means to be human, right? We get to the center of what it means to be human, and what is so central to our humanity is love and intimacy and connection. And so I am incredibly privileged to sit at the edge of that every day in my work, and to just bear witness to these amazing, raw, important moment. I mean, important's not even like a good enough word, but just to sit at the edge of these intimate moments that are really, there are no words to describe. I think that's why I'm struggling. Like there's just a complete lack of vocabulary that we have in the English language to truly speak to the amazement that I see every day in these moments of connection between people loving people, right? That's what it's about.
And the reminder of the gift of authentic connection and presence, and to be seen, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So your heart, I always end with this question, and I know your heart went, oh, sweetheart, 6-year-old and your sister, your heart was deeply impacted and changed by that moment. But you now courageous one, beautiful one. I just love you. I don't know you enough to say that maybe, but I just love what you're doing, which is why I'm having you on this. Um, the people who work in this field, I just have deep respect for. So in saying all those things, how is your heart, if you really sit with it, been changed by this work?
Yeah, that is such a good question and a beautiful question, because there's, I think about this a lot, mostly because of our conversations. I don't think I paid enough attention to it before, but I remember one time sitting with you and you're like, I was listening to my heart, and I was like, how does one listen to their heart? Like, this is, being indoctrinated into the culture of medicine, but learning now to reconnect with the parts of me that make me me. But I think that it's this interesting balance of being able to be intimately connected to your patients and sit in presence with them, while also finding a healthy boundary to protect your heart. And I think that's a line that I am walking every day. And as a relatively new physician, I'm trying to understand how can I find this balance a little bit more. How can I find this balance, right? And that's the beauty of connecting with people like yourself and the people who've had more experience in this field, is really learning those lessons. Like, how do you sustainably do this work for, however many years, 30 years. And at the same time, Janie Brown, who was on your one of your episodes, shared this poem with us. We're part of this writing group, and she shared this poem that says, "Give me a heart that breaks." Right. And so that's the other piece of it, is my heart has broken, and through that, as a 6-year-old whose mother died, and through that has expanded in a way that has allowed me to build capacity to sit through the suffering of someone else, because I have become intimately connected to my own suffering. And I have sat in my own sadness for many, many years, and have a level of comfort with that feeling. And so therefore feel equipped to sit in sadness with someone else. And so give me a heart that breaks, right? Like, let it break and let it grow to serve others in this role.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's truly beautiful. And I do agree in that it's rare in life. It's an art to have life come at you and impact you and still find a way to keep your heart open and curious and childlike. And when you meet, my father was like that. I've had mentors in my life. They're such a blessing, and they remind you that even the challenges are a gift. Not to neglect, like as the Buddhists say, to push nothing away, kind of invite it in. They form you and allow you to be even richer and deeper in all of your engagement with life itself. Right?
Totally. And so I think now my challenge, and I think the challenge that many of us who are new to this work face, is holding that for all that it is, and also protecting ourselves in a way that allows us to do this for many years. And I think that is my challenge now. And that's the thing that I struggle with, is how to create. I think a misconception is that palliative care practitioners and hospice workers bleed empathy everywhere they go. But the thing is, we can't, right? We just can't do that all the time, every day, with every single patient. So it's how do I truly honor this person and sit in full presence with them, while also protecting ourselves too. So
Well, and I had Dr. Michael Kearney on recently to talk about self-care, a seasoned palliative physician, and he brought
I'm reading his book now for the first time. Can you believe it?
It's a beautiful book, The Nest in the Stream. But he reflected on exquisite empathy, which was actually from a fellow who's at UBC here, but exquisite empathy. So not burnout, people who'd been through it all and found a way, like in his book, The Nest in the Stream, to keep the heart open and allow it to flow through, but not overwhelm. And that is an art
Absolutely. It
and
is such an art.
refinement. Yeah.
And it's something we don't learn, right? Like that's not taught to us in our training.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why we see so many people doing our work becoming hardened to it rather than allowing it to inspire growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to hold something like the goal or the intent of exquisite empathy as a possibility, as opposed to just I'm being going to get fried and burn out, right?
Yeah.
Like there is a beauty that can come from this
Yeah.
if you're honest, right?
There's another option. Yeah.
Yeah, and do your own good self-care.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any last things that you would like to
No,
say
this
as
is
we
great.
wrap up?
Thank you so much. I feel honored to be here and to be speaking with you and knowing all of the other amazing people who you've sat down to speak with. I just feel like so honored that I'm here as well.
Well, you're amazing in that pool of people. And so I am blessed to have you here and the wonderful and courageous and inspirational things you're doing. So a reminder to everybody, you want to find Lauren, look for her podcast, Talk Dying to Me, and her website. She's on Instagram. She's getting more and more followers and of all ages. Young people love her, of course. They're reflecting her. So please look her up, and we will put links in the bottom of the the write-up at the end on the YouTube channel so you can actually find out more about her. And again, just loved having you on today. Think you're amazing and doing a wonderful job, and beautiful to watch your heart unfold in your calling and how you're serving others. And it's also, and I'm getting emotional about this, but it's a legacy to your mom.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the gift of her and the life journey that she has inadvertently sent you on through her departure. So I can see you as being a beautiful mom one day as a result of all that you're experiencing. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Talk Dying to Me. Yes. Everyone needs to look for that. Okay. Take care.
You too.